Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and we have a ton of Core Set 2020 previews to look at today. We're going to recap and analyze all the cards that were previewed throughout the day. If you're curious as to the sources, which content creators revealed which cards, check out the description below. You'll see all that information. Also, if you're thinking about picking up a box of Core Set 2020, they do have them now on FlipsideGaming.com, and you can use that Heroes promo code to save a little cash. With that out of the way, though, let's get into it. First off, Wizards gave us some information on the Core Set 2020 promo packs. It's all here on the page. I'm going to go over the highlights for you. Now, promo packs are replacing the former Open House, Draft Weekend, Magic Weekend, and Friday Night Magic promos. The events aren't going away, but now you'll get promo packs there instead of specific promo cards. So for this coming season, that means the Open House, June 29th and 30th, pre-release July 5th through 7th, you could get these packs. Draft Weekend, July 13th and 14th. Magic Weekend Commander, August 24th and 25th. So this does mean that stores do decide how they give out those packs, so it could vary at different stores. What's in these packs? These packs contain 4 cards, using 4 slots for cards to be pulled from specific places. Slot 1 is a promo stamped version of any rare or mythic rare from Core Set 2020. Slot 2, 75% of the time this will be another promo stamped rare or mythic rare from the curated list. If you're not familiar with that list, it is a pretty big list of different rares and mythic rares that are all standard legal currently. 25% of the time, though, it will be a Japanese alternate art Planeswalker from War of the Spark. Slot 3, a promo stamped alternate art basic land. We're going to look at those in just a second. Slot 4, one of the 5 M20 cards in the dark frame of previous Friday Night Magic promos. These are mixed in with the preview cards that we're going to look at today, so I'll point them out once we get to those 5. Now, let's look at those basic lands that are going to be included here. Here's a quick shot of them. This is brand new art. We also got to look at the packaging for Core Set 2020 today. There's the bundle on the left and the booster box on the right. Here's your art for the booster packs with the Johnny, Yangling, and Sorin on them. And here are your 5 different Planeswalker decks. Now, we don't get to see the Planeswalker yet, but as you can see, the featured Planeswalkers are Ajani, Yangling, Sorin, Chandra, and Vivian. Notice they now include 1 booster pack instead of 2, but the price is supposed to be less. Let's look at the buy a box promo. Of course, the program is still the same. If you go to your local game store and buy a booster box in person, as long as supplies last, you'll get one of these cards. This time around, it's Rien, Angel of Rebirth. Pretty sweet commander card. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. Like, it's not something that I see necessarily showing up in standard or anything like that for the casting cost. But usually when I play Commander, I might have a lot of multicolored creatures. This is also an Angel, so that's worth noting. Could be fun. Ajani, Strength of the Pride. Okay, here's the Ajani Planeswalker that you will find in booster packs, and this is pretty good. Forecasting cost and 5 loyalty does make me feel like this has a chance to see some standard play. Maybe in a tokens build. Now, the ultimate costs 0, but you do have to be 15 points higher than your starting life total, so that's going to take a little work. I mean, Ajani can help you get there, but I'm not necessarily going to evaluate the card just on that ultimate. I just think the +1 and -2 are pretty good. The +1 sure is a little board dependent, but like I said, a tokens deck I think can get around that pretty well. And there could be some other decks down the road that could get around that easily too. Modern, this sounds crazy, maybe it is crazy, this is a little bit of a long shot, but I do think I'd at least consider this in a Soul Sisters build. Maybe throw Karn the Great Creator and Mycosynthellatus in there too? Could be kind of interesting, right? So that's something that I would at least consider. Like I said, long shot, probably not going to get there, but I couldn't help but to imagine that possibility. Now, Commander, Oathbreaker, yeah, you're going to play this and be excited about it. Maybe it's in a go wide strategy, maybe it's in a life gain strategy. I think it could be really good there too. Limited, while it's a mythic, it should be good, and yes, it will be a bomb there. Angel of Vitality. So it looks like white has a little bit of a life gain theme here. This is a 2/2 Angel for 3 with flying, so it kind of feels like a Windrake, but it has some nice upside to it. Especially if you are in a life gain strategy, this could be a good limited card for you. Devout Decree. Okay, for limited purposes, I would say leave this in your sideboard until you know what your opponent's playing. If they're playing black or red, though, definitely bring it in. It's going to be strong for you. Now, what about standard? It is a sorcery and not an instant, so it does have that against it. But Teferi Time Raveler can make it a little bit better. That's at least interesting. And it does hit some big targets. The new Chandra Awakened Inferno, it does take care of that. although maybe it's a little too late by that time because you're already going to be taking damage from the emblem most likely. It does hit Sarkhan the Masterless though. Arclight Phoenix. Also the Scry is kind of nice. Could see a little bit of standard play out of sideboards perhaps, maybe more so after rotation though. Disenchant. Alright, this one's a classic reprint from Alpha Beta Unlimited, and it got some new art. A little surprising to see this in a way because Wizards has talked about how they don't feel like this is truly a white card anymore in the color pie, but nevertheless, here it is. And I do think it will see standard play out of sideboards. In limited core sets, typically this is a good sideboard card. Sometimes I have main decked this in Draft or Sealed, but when it comes to core sets, they're probably going to be a little more creature heavy, so I would most likely just use it as a sideboard option. Leyline of Sanctity. Just going to slide that one in there like you didn't even notice. Yeah, this is a crazy reprint. This is a $25 card. The printings for Magic 2011 and Modern Masters 2015 are both about that price right now. So this is a high value rare reprint in the set. This also got some new art, and remember this and other Leylines, more on that in a few moments, they get better with the London Mulligan. Let's talk standard a little bit because of course it's returning to standard. Yeah, you know what? It's going to be a sideboard card. It deals with some of the mono red aggro strategies. I know I play that deck and don't really want to see this card show up because it's going to shut off that direct damage that deck does rely on, at least in part. And besides that, all those control decks are running Thought Erasure right now. This will definitely see play there. And when it comes to Draft or Sealed, it's a good sideboard card. If you need it, bring it in. You might not always need it though. Lifesinger Loxodon. This one comes from a French language preview. And yeah, you know, I thought about standard first and I kind of said, could I get this into like a high alert deck? I don't think for that casting cost, unfortunately. It's just a little too expensive. Now, obviously, if you have a lot of creatures, which you should in Draft or Sealed, especially Sealed, you could find yourself in more board stalls, then this might not be a bad card, and if I don't main deck it, some matchups I might side it in. But ultimately, it does sit there as a 4/6. The first ability could be good some of the time, especially if you fell behind early in the game. The mana sink at the bottom is cool, but if I'm behind at that point, it doesn't have trample, it doesn't have evasion. You could pump it more than once, but it would take a lot of mana to do so. It's not going to happen all the time. So all things considered, nothing crazy here. Maybe something a little bit better in Sealed than Draft. But you just might have better things in your pool. This one was a Chinese simplified language preview, but on your left side you see a recent printing of the card, and it is Planar Cleansing. This was in Magic 2010, 2013, and 2014. This will see standard play out of the sideboard to deal with things like Super Friends. Limited sweeps are always good cards. You're going to play them in the main deck. Now, this one is 3 on color, 3 white and 3. I'm going to talk more about that later. You're going to notice a trend here. But if you can swing the cost, you want to play this in Draft or Sealed. If you're doing well, you might not need it, but it's a good panic button to have. Ether Gust. This is actually interesting. It's another one of these color hose cards. Choose target spell or permanent that's red or green. Its owner puts it on top or bottom of their library. Okay. So if I'm the opponent and you use that on me, it's my decision because I'm the one doing it. So you're giving your opponent a decision, which I don't love, but you got to look at it this way. It's at least a tempo play. And in blue, a little tempo play like this for 2 mana, sometimes that's backbreaking. I do think it could see some standard sideboard play, just depends on where the meta goes. There might be some practical purpose that comes up at some point as to why you'd want to use this on yourself as well, because you can do that. Also in limited, another card I would definitely consider bringing in if my opponent has red or green. The Tempsy's All-Seeing. Okay, this is a little too expensive, I think, for standard for what it's doing. It's a very interesting card, though. Limited, it's a rare, but if I do get to see it, yeah, I'd be happy to play with it. It is 3 on color, 3 blue and 3, so my deck has to be able to feel pretty confident about casting it. It's not very splashable, but as long as I can do that, 4 or 5 flyer, pay a blue and 2, tap, draw 2 cards and discard a card, some other ability that most likely will never be relevant in Draft or Sealed, yeah, sure, sign me up. One thing to point out when it comes to limited with a card like this, though, there does appear to be a lot of cards in the set, and you're going to see more as we go through the video today, that are pushing you towards either a monocolor build or maybe at least heavy into one color. Then there's other strategies that are pushing you into like 3 color wedges. So it's an interesting dynamic in a core set, but watch for that as we go through the video today. Beyond that, could I ever make that other ability relevant? Maybe in Commander. It could be some jank, but take something like, I don't know, Seasons Past and Chandra's Ignition. Yeah, that's probably jank, but it could be fun. Here's a reprint. This is the first of those promo cards that you're going to find within those promo packs. So you're going to see the other 4 as we go throughout the video, but the first one is Negate. Yeah, Negate is a pretty sweet card. It's not going anywhere, I guess. It stays in Standard. It was in Rivals of Ixalan, so it's been there. Always a decent limited card. Sees Modern, sees Standard play. Don't think that's going to change in the new Standard coming up. So, yeah, we got Negate a little bit longer. Octoprophet. Solid limited card for me. Hill Giant with upside. 3/3 for 4. Enters the battlefield scry 2. Nothing crazy here, but very, very playable. Unsummon. Okay, here's a reprint. And, this always works very well in limited. Great tempo play. Standard. Yeah, I think it could see a little bit of play. Maybe in mono blue tempo, for example. Disfigure. Here's another promo pack card and another reprint. Originally from Zendikar, but also in Masters 25 and Dual Decks Nissa versus Omnixilis. This is actually an awesome Pauper card. It's in a lot of different builds. And if you're a Pauper player and you don't have copies for some reason, or maybe you just want to get this new promo version, well, here you go. So what about Standard? Back in its day, it actually did see some Standard play. I think it could again, especially after rotation when we lose some things. I think this could fill in some gaps there for you. Limited, great card. It's an uncommon. You'll be able to pick maybe one if you're lucky, a couple of these up at times. Cheap way to take care of some small creatures or finish off a larger creature after combat. Dread Presence, another Hill Giant with upside, and yet another card that's kind of pushing you towards a mono-black theme, maybe in limited or at least mostly black. But I'll be honest with you, even if I'm in a 50-50 split or even less, I could see myself playing this because a 3/3 for 4 is just fine. And then that upside, even if I only play like 1 or 2 swamps after that, I'll take it. That's fantastic. Great drafter sealed rare here for sure, and I do think it's actually very first pickable, even though we haven't seen most of the set yet. Now, when it comes to Standard, maybe it has a chance, perhaps with Scapeshift. Scapeshift is around for a few more months. Perhaps a Golgari Scapeshift deck could be a thing, who knows? In Commander, this could combo well with Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. All your future land drops from the point this comes into play would be able to give you those options. Nothing wrong with that. Look who's back with new art. Leyline of the Void. Wow, okay, this is an expensive reprint. The original Guild Pact is about $60. The foil there's $175. Magic 2011, about the same, $57, $58. That foil about $150. So this is a pretty big card to show up in a core set financially. Now, the reason it's so expensive is because it is a sideboard card against a lot of strategies out there in the formats where it's legal, Dredge being one of them. Hogak, of course, for Modern Horizons is pushing Dredge even harder than ever in Modern. This card has been on the rise as recently as the last 24 hours or so. Now in Standard, it's a very timely reprint too. You can use this against things like Command the Dreadhorde, Arclight Phoenix, the Drake strategies. This will see a lot of play there too, I have no doubt. It's a little awkward and limited, but there might be the weird occasion where you could sideboard it in for value. Scheming Symmetry. This is an interesting rare tutor. Okay, so for 1 black sorcery speed, I get to tutor, put the card on top of my library. But another target player gets to do the same thing. So, does that make this card bad? Not necessarily. Let's talk Standard first with this one. This is letting me tutor. Wonderful. So my opponent now is doing the same thing. In a vacuum, that's not great. I might not want to play this card, but if I got some tricks up my sleeve, it becomes interesting. If I can mill my opponent, then whatever they put on top, I get to take away in theory, or maybe I can make them shuffle or something like that. But look at it this way. I have Ashiok, I have Jace Wielder of Mysteries. My opponent's going to know what's up, right? Ashiok won't stop them from tutoring because it's an ability I control. But whatever they put on top, I can simply mill away. So they can just put a bad card on top that they don't want if they know that's coming. Or I could hold the card back in my hand, play it after I play this. But if they see the open mana, they might know something's up too, especially if that is a deck that is successful. So then the mind game begins. If I put a bad card on top of my deck, well, my opponent might think I'm putting a bad card on top of my deck and might decide not to mill me. So I do think it becomes kind of interesting. And I do think there are some decks that might be able to take advantage of it at some point in Standard. Another card this might work well with is just Teferi Time Raveler, because then you could play this on your opponent's turn, so you'll get to your card at least before they get to their card, and that makes it a little bit better. In Modern, I'd like to combo this with Archive Trap and see how that works in a mill deck, for example. Again, maybe that's a little bit of a reach, but I do think it's at least worth testing. You know where this would be really good, though? Two-Headed Giants. If you're a fan of Two-Headed Giant, this card will be perfect for you. The other place that it could be cool is Commander, because you could kind of forge an alliance, play a little politics, and say, you know what, I'm going to search for something, I'll let you search for something too. So the card definitely could be good there. Thought Distortion. Okay, you glance at this card, and this is why I did it first. I was like, okay, 6 casting cost, sorcery, uncommon. What's my next card? But actually, this card might see standard play out of sideboards. Look at the rest of it. This spell can't be countered. Target opponent reveals their hand, exile all non-creature, non-land cards from that player's hand and graveyard. That can be kind of backbreaking against a control deck if you can pull this off. They can't counter it. Now, granted, Narset's Reversal does mess with this, and that could be a consideration for sure. But I do think that you might see this in standard coming out of sideboards to deal with control decks, and control decks could bring it in for mirror matchups too. In limited, this might not be great for you because draft or sealed are usually pretty creature-heavy formats, but hey, you never know. If your opponent does happen to have a lot of non-creature, non-land cards that you care about, then go ahead and bring it in out of the sideboard. Yorick's Fenlurker. This one's kind of interesting. Again, 2 on color here, 2 black, so kind of promoting a heavy color identity. Very interesting. This has that shade type ability, but it's not a shade. You can pump it +1/+1 for a black and 2. That's always going to be good for you in draft and sealed right off the bat. The other ability will be fine too. Enters the battlefield, each opponent exiles a card from their hand. Notice it is exile and not discard. Very good. And in limited, sure, if you play this early, your opponent might be able to toss out something that isn't too important at that given time. But getting card advantage over the long run is always going to be beneficial to you. And if you get a creature that's still good even later in the game out of the deal, then yeah, this is very, very playable. In standard, I do think it could see a little bit of play too, maybe in mid-range or control builds, perhaps a mono-black build if we end up getting there at some point. So what I like about this card when it comes to standard is I don't have to worry if my opponent has an Nullhide Ferox, for example, because of the exile here and not discard. Also, this would be better against Phoenix players. You don't give them an opportunity to discard their Phoenix. Ultimately, I do think this is a good card. Cavalier of Flame. Now, this one is a mythic. I'm not really feeling it for standard, though. Here's my thought. It just doesn't fit into what Red's trying to do currently in standard. Now, maybe that's going to change post-rotation. Perhaps down the road it could be very different. But right now, here's my struggle with it. It costs 5, 3 on color, but that's okay in this current standard. 6/5 body. Partially, it wants you to have mana so you can pump this and your other creatures with that red and 1 mana sink. But the current red deck doesn't have a ton of creatures. They have some, but they kind of juggle between creatures and burn spells, and while you're dealing with one, you're kind of getting taken out by the other. This goes a little too heavy on the fact that you want to have some creatures on the battlefield. And beyond that, the second ability kind of wants you to toss your extra lands, but that first ability wants you to play those lands. So that feels a little strange to me. Now, granted, again, yes, I could toss some extra lands if I'm running out of gas in mono red or even like a mid-range red deck. But then I'm not playing those lands in case I run into an Experimental Frenzy or a Chandra Fire Artisan, and that's kind of what I want to do right now in that build. So it just kind of feels awkward. The last ability felt like it crept out of Modern Horizons for some reason, which maybe could be good if I was able to create a deck that was a little more land-centric, and maybe that does happen in the future, who knows. Maybe someone can figure out how to play this with Scapeshift, for example. That could be a thing. So I wouldn't count it out as standard, but I do think it would take an entirely new build for it to kind of get there. In limited, it's a mythic, so it should be good, and it is very good, even if you're just playing a 6/5 for 5. 3 on color, though, so of course make sure you're able to cast it. You don't want to splash this or anything like that. But as long as you can, pumping your stuff is going to be good for you. It also gives haste. And like I said, even if you don't have a great board state, still pumps itself. Sure, doesn't have trample, doesn't have evasion, but it is still pretty big for what you're paying for. The economy's there. And it has the other abilities to boot, which sometimes will be relevant. The other thing to pay attention to is it is an elemental, and it does appear that this set is giving us a Timur Elemental theme. Remember the Chandras we saw last week, they all interacted in some ways with elementals. Now the weird part about that is, in draft or sealed, if you are going Timur Elemental, a 3 red and 2 casting cost spell could be kind of difficult to pull off maybe in some builds. Commander, there's places that use this, like Lord Windgrace for example. Chandra's Embercatch. You know, if elementals could make it into standard, if they give us enough pieces, then who knows, maybe that Cavalier will get in there as well as this card. Now, in limited, this is just going to be straight up good. 2/2 for 2. Even if I don't have that many elementals or I'm not playing some kind of tribal elemental theme, we still get a 2/2 with upside, and you know how I feel about those. If I have maybe just a couple elementals in my deck and I'm able to cheat them out a little bit faster, wonderful. The more you have, obviously, the better. Also, you got to start thinking about those casual or commander tribal elemental decks, or maybe use one of those new Chandras and build yourself an Oathbreaker elemental deck. Chandra's Regulator. Okay, the one on the left is a bundle promo, so when you buy a bundle pack, you're going to find this in there. The one on the right is the copy you would find in a regular booster pack. Pretty cool that they did that, actually. What about the card itself? Well, it's interesting. Let's talk limited first. It's a rare. You won't see it all the time there. if you get a chance to play with it, yeah, if you're in a heavy red deck, again, another card that's kind of pushing you towards a little bit of devotion, then it's going to be fine. If you don't have a heavy red build, though, I might skip it. Here's the deal. Later in the game, especially in sealed, you're in a long, drawn-out game. It's a board stall. You need to hit gas. If you miss and hit a mountain, okay, pay 1, tap, discard, try again. It's not a mana sink. It does tap, but hey, for what you paid here, not bad at all. Even better if you happen to have a Chandra. And remember, there's an uncommon Chandra in the set, so it's not really out of the question. In Standard, I don't really think it gets there unless somebody figures out how to make a Chandra deck, which there are a lot of Chandras that are going to be in Standard, so who knows, it could happen. The other place this is kind of interesting, though, is Mono Red Prison in Modern. Yeah, I know, that sounds a little bit crazy, but think about this with Chandra Torch of Defiance. Might actually be worth testing there. Also, Commander, Oathbreaker, there you could probably actually build a Chandra deck and pull it off. Chandra Spitfire, this one is a reprint from Magic 2011. Let's talk Standard first. At some point, Mono Red might need a replacement for Goblin Chain Whirler. This is not as good as Goblin Chain Whirler, but it could fill in and maybe be okay if there's nothing else better that shows up. So I would definitely not count it out as Standard going forward, probably most likely post-rotation though. Limited, I think it's a good card as long as you have enough ways to do non-combat damage. You don't necessarily need a deck full of them, but you want at least a handful of ways so that you can turn this card on, preferably instant so you can surprise your opponent from time to time with this. Worst case scenario, if you don't have a lot of those opportunities, then maybe you don't play this but bring it in out of your sideboard if you come up against a hyper-aggressive matchup. This does gum up the game pretty good. 3 casting cost, 1/3 flyer is going to slow a lot of decks down that are trying to get a lot of early damage across. And on top of that, your opponent has to think about their attacks if you have open mana. Dragon Mage. Now, this one is a reprint originally from Scourge, also in Commander 2015 and 2016. And this actually commands about a $20 price for that Scourge foil. So this is not a bad reprint. Also got downgraded to uncommon. So in Limited, yeah, this will be a good card. It's a little expensive, sure, but a 5/5 flyer is always going to be good. Doing combat damage to a player means everybody gets to Wheel of Fortune, which is kind of crazy. The idea being red hopefully benefits more from that because in Limited at least where you don't have a whole lot of tricks probably to play with this, you're just going to be able to cast your stuff faster than your opponent and pull ahead, plus you're beating them down with a 5/5 flyer at the same time. So it could be very good for you there, especially as an uncommon. Now for today's Standard, it feels a little too expensive unfortunately, but I gotta think, would I want to at least test this with Narset? Maybe ramp into this thing, have Narset out there on the battlefield? I don't know, maybe there's something there. Flame Sweep. Okay, this is one of those promo cards. Now, this is not a reprint, and it's actually kind of sweet. For a red and 2, you get to deal 2 damage to each creature, except for creatures you control with flying at instant speed. This is very standard playable. Yeah, I do think this is very reminiscent of Fiery Cannonade, and in some ways even more flexible. I do feel like you could see standard sideboard play in Phoenix/Drake decks, depending on whether they're together or apart that given week. And Timur Reclamation might be interested in this too. In Limited, it's good if you have flyers, obviously, but even if you don't have that many flyers, sometimes you might want to just run this as a panic button generally. Or if your opponent does happen to have a lot of small creatures and you don't main deck it for some reason, remember it's there to side it in. Another big reprint here, Goblin Ringleader, originally from Apocalypse, showed up in some dual decks. Dual decks Elves versus Goblins, Merfolk versus Goblins, also in the Dual Decks Anthology. It had a Friday night promo at one point. But now it will be Standard legal and Modern legal for the first time. Modern already got a big Goblin push because of Modern Horizons. Here's another card that will contribute to that, and I do think we'll see a lot of Modern play going forward. This already sees Legacy Goblin play, so it's not that much of a stretch. And I do think a Goblin deck is possible in Standard. There's a lot of good Goblins out there. Limited, a 2/2 for 4 with haste is not really where you want to be. So for this to be good, it needs some Goblins. We'll have to see what the set brings us this week. Infuriate. Okay, yeah, this is a solid combat trick for Limited. In Standard, maybe try it out in the Feather deck. Not sure if it's as good as the stuff that's already there, but it's worth at least testing. Commander Feather, though, yeah, you could just put it in there if nothing else. Leyline of Combustion. Now, this is a new Leyline, but this is a pretty good one. I think it could see play in Standard, Modern, and Legacy. The reason it's so interesting to me is because if I was playing a mono red deck, for example, and I had a mirror matchup, I think I would want to side this in. It could make some of those mirror matchups pretty crazy. Now, Standard does have a little bit of a mixture between aggressive creatures as well as burn spells, but I still think it's good enough there. Could get more interesting if you're talking about modern burn mirror matches, for example. And this is also good against some types of storm. Limited, this is still kind of awkward and is a sideboard card, but I could see myself bringing this one in more often in a limited game than many of the other Leylines. Silverbacks Shaman. Not a lot to say about this one, but it is a very good common card for draft or sealed. 5/4 trample for 5 when it dies, draw a card. Yeah, there is nothing wrong with that. That's a pretty push green common. I'd be happy to pick this up maybe in the middle of a draft pack. It's going to do work for you. Threshing Brontodon. This is one of the promo pack cards, and yes, it is a reprint, and of course it was from Rivals of Ixalan, so it is already standard legal. Sees a lot of standard play too, as a matter of fact, many times out of sideboards, but again, it's going to be in the format longer, so you can play with it for a longer period of time, which is nice. When it comes to limited, this is always an awesome card. A 3/4 for 3 is great, even if you're not worried about artifacts or enchantments at all. Veil of Summer. This is another color hosing card, kind of a take on Autumn's Veil, but I actually like this one better. Just does more for you generally. Now, Autumn's Veil actually sees some sideboard modern play. I think this will as well. And this will definitely see standard play out of boards too. Limited, kind of the same thing. You're not going to play this if you don't know what your opponent's playing, but if they are playing blue or black, go ahead and side it in. Wakeroot Elemental. This comes from a German language preview. And this is a little expensive. I won't lie to you here. I mean, a 6 casting cost 5/5 that doesn't have trample, doesn't have evasion. It's got a good ability, but that ability is asking for 5 green mana. Now, it is a persistent ability. Untap a target land you control, becomes a 5/5 elemental creature with haste. It's still a land, but notice it does not say till end of turn, so it does stay that way. That's pretty good, but it takes a little time to get there. Now, sure, green is the color of ramp, but I just feel like there's more consistent things you could be doing. Even just playing Nissa Who Shakes the World, I think that could be a bigger play in a lot of cases, especially considering that's one cheaper. Now, a couple things to notice. Another card that is asking you to be very devoted, this time to green. And also, it does turn your lands into elementals, so that could be interesting too in some kind of elemental synergy. Timur Elemental, if it could get there in standard, just maybe this could sneak in, but I'm a little skeptical overall. Limited, it's going to be good there. A little more expensive, sure, but it's going to do a lot of stuff, especially in a board stall. It could definitely swing a game for you. Perfect rare if you're able to play it there. Commander, yeah, it's going to be good there too, especially with Gaia's Cradle, or if you can't afford a Gaia's Cradle like myself, you can go ahead and try to transform Growing Rites of Itlamok. Pretty much the same thing, right? Carps Night, this is actually pretty sweet. Okay, this is the last promo pack card. 2/2 for 2, granted 2 different colors. Zombie Knight, that could be relevant sometimes. I would consider this for standard aristocrats. You might get them coming and going. That alone could make the deck that much better. Maybe pushes it a little bit in the standard format this season. Outside of that, I would consider this with Abzan tokens. You have March of the Multitudes there. That could be a big play. Commander, yeah, there's a few builds that could want this. Tokens, zombies, blink. Oathbreaker players play this with Aminatu. When it comes to limited, yeah, you know what? Granted, you might not always get this out on turn 2 being 2 different colors. But even if you're just playing this 2/2 and getting a little bit of value when a few creatures come into play before it dies, definitely worth your time. Creeping Trailblazer. Okay, here's another card for that Timur Elemental draft deck, right? If this gets past you when you're drafting elementals, you'll be very happy. Whether you're drafting them or you're just looking for some synergies in your sealed pool, this could be a great card. It's a 2/2 for 2 different colors again. But it's a nice curve filler that gives plenty of upside, especially if you have other cards to synergize with it. Now, what about standard? I've been saying it throughout the whole video. We haven't seen enough of the set yet for me to say definitely we're going to see some kind of elemental deck in standard. But if it gets there, this will be a part of it. Another place you could try this out is just casual elementals at the kitchen table, commander elementals, or Oathbreaker with one of the new Chandras. Empyrean Eagle. Okay, I mentioned earlier that Jeskai / Azorius in this case do have a Flying Matters theme. 2/3 for 3 with flying. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+1. Nothing wrong with that in limited any day of the week. The card's good on its own, but of course it will be better with other flyers, so hopefully you can grab some or have more in your sealed pool. Aside from that, could this see some standard play? Standard, you know someone's going to try to build the flyers deck. They always do. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. We'll have to see what else this set brings. I don't really feel like this is good enough for modern spirits because notice it is a bird spirit. But Commander, yeah, you could play it in Spirit Tribal there, or who's up for a little bird tribal? Ironroot Warlord. Now, this is a fantastic limited uncommon. Maybe not a great standard card, but if you're playing Draft or Sealed, you're going to love to see a copy or two of this. 3 casting cost, power equal to the number of creatures you control. So kind of encouraging you to go wide, which does feel very Selesnya. And then it has that mana sink to create 1/1 white soldier creature tokens, and that to me is the important part here. The creature itself having 5 toughness is pretty substantial, and being able to grow the power, especially with that mana sink, is very intriguing to me. But still, it doesn't have trample, it doesn't have evasion, but I don't care because in a limited game, sometimes you're just in a board stall and you need board presence. Mana sinks like that can help you pull ahead. Fantastic card for just 3 mana here. Kaikar Wind's Fury, this one is a mythic, and there is a wedge cycle in the set Wizards did talk about today. So this is the one for Jeskai. I did mention earlier that Jeskai cares about flyers. Kind of sad that this is a mythic when it comes to Draft or Sealed, because it does seem to fit in really well with other cards we saw today. But if you happen to get it, wonderful. You might have yourself a good flyers deck on your hands. A 3/3 for 4 with these abilities could be a lot of fun in standard, but I just think it's too fragile. The 3 toughness for 4 is just going to get blown up too quickly, I'm afraid, especially in this current standard. Things are really moving fast right now, and that is because we're at the end of this standard cycle. Maybe post-rotation things could change a little bit, who knows, but at least right now I'm not really feeling it there. Where I am feeling it, though, is Commander. There's a lot of different things you could do with this. First off, it is a bird wizard, so you could play this in a wizard tribal build there. Or, like I said earlier, who's up for bird tribal. But aside from that, you could throw this into a spirits build because it makes 1/1 white spirits with flying. You could throw this into a storm style build because you can sacrifice the spirit to add red mana. Jeskai Ascendancy would play really well with this in Commander. Maybe you're just throwing this out there and then playing some non-creature spells and getting value. Yeah, you could play this fair, you could play it a little bit unfair, but ultimately I do see a lot of people playing this in Commander. Risen Reef, let's talk limited first with this one. Here we are back with this elemental strategy for Timur. And you know, if you have a lot of elementals, this is going to get out of hand really quick if you can keep it alive. It's fragile, 3 casting cost 1/1, 2 different colors. On its own, it's not the worst limited card. I know it's a 1/1 for 3. But you get to look at your top card. If it's a land, it goes into play tapped. If it's not, you draw the card. So you get a little bit of board presence and it replaces itself. It gets crazy, though, if you play more elementals after that, because every time you do, you get that trigger again. That's where this card is really going to shine. Could this make it into a standard elemental build, assuming one can get there in standard? Maybe. The power level is great behind this card, but the fragility, I think, is still going to be a problem, considering by the time it comes out, there's a lot of things that are going to be able to destroy it quickly. Because of that, I don't have a lot of confidence in this card for standard. But I really would like to try this out. Maybe I would go ahead and put it into like a Commander Elemental or Oathbreaker deck. See how it plays there. Cryptic Caves, good card. It feels like they want to push me more into a Devotion build though, or at least real heavy in one color. The problem with a card like this is if you use it as part of your mana base, then you can't get too greedy on colors without sacrificing some efficiency, and that could be a problem. If you're running a monocolor deck or 2-color deck, then yeah, in limited, this will be great. You'll play it as part of your mana base and have no problem. And even if you are getting greedy, if you really, really want this ability, maybe you're even getting a little bit heavy on mana, then you could put this as maybe your 18th land or something like that, and that could be fine. Ultimately, being able to pay 1, sack a land later in the game to draw a card, that can be very good. Now, in Standard, you kind of have the same thing going on. Like, a control deck would love this, but you don't want to necessarily throw it in a control deck that cares about hitting their shock lands and getting their duels, right? So, what you would do instead is probably put this in like a Dimir control build. So if this set brings more cards like this, you might see people actually shedding some colors in Standard next season, who knows? I might just end up playing Dimir control instead of Grixis control because I have access to this card and maybe some others. You do have to remember that Arch of Araska is still in Standard for a few months, and some decks play that. This interacts in a better way with Crucible of Worlds, for example, so that's definitely worth noting. Ultimately, I do think this does see Standard play, maybe more so post-rotation, but I do think you're going to see it show up in a few places. Commander, play this in Gitrog Monster, Lord Windgrace, Maltrotha. Generally, it's just going to be a good card there. Alright, with that being said, those are the cards for today. We're going to come back tomorrow and recap and analyze everything that happens over the next 24 hours. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.